Introducing Daniel Natal Premium. You get 22% more pontification, 13% more half-baked reactionary theories, and 8% more exclusives, like the fact that it's come to our attention that Donald Trump uses $20 bills as dryer sheets to make his clothes smell like money. This and other dubious assertions on The Daniel Natal Show. Dennis Behreandt has an interesting article in the New American Magazine this month called Slavery and Dehumanization. He talks about the various methods by which human beings were subdued throughout history and notices a theme, namely that slaves were oftentimes forced to wear face masks as signs of submission. He writes about the harrowing case of an African princess who was swallowed up by the slave trade named Escravia Anastasia. He writes, among the means of torture and dehumanization that Equiano observed while on his travels as a slave was the use of the mask. In one case, he related the appearance of a slave woman in Virginia that recalls the use of a mask/muzzle to submerge the personality and humanity of Anastasia. While in Virginia, he was summoned to the home of a plantation owner who had become ill. Esquiano's job was to fan the man to keep him cool. Of the incident, he recalled, when I came into the room where he was, I was very much affrighted at some things I saw, and the more so, as I had seen a black woman slave, as I came through the house, who was cooking dinner, and the poor creature was cruelly loaded with various kinds of iron machines. She had one particularly on her head, which locked her mouth so fast that she could scarcely speak, and could not eat nor drink. I was much astonished and shocked at this contrivance, which I afterward learned was called the iron muzzle. Behreandt then proceeds to give examples from history and from cultures all around the world that use masks to strip away people's identities and to steal their voices. Something that social scientist Philip Zimbardo writes about. He did the famous Stanford prison experiment back in the 1970s, where he took college students and sorted participants randomly into either wardens or prisoners. It was the luck of the draw. When Zimbardo put them in costumes, he saw how effective these were for shaping the behavior of the person wearing the uniforms. He noted, people's aggression can also increase when they feel anonymous. For example, if they wear a uniform, hood, or mask, Zimbardo said. You minimize social responsibility, he explained. Nobody knows who you are, so therefore, you're not individually liable. There's also a group effect when all of you are masked. It provides a fear in other people because they can't see you, and you lose your humanity. Losing touch with your humanity is especially significant when you're a little kid forced to wear a mask. One of the brain's chief jobs early on in the life of an infant is to help it to develop social skills by learning to read people's faces. Within just hours, babies, through unfocused eyes, are primed to stare at faces and to try to make sense of them. This is a critical skill in navigating the world and establishing the rapport which makes human social interactions possible. Social scientists have long noticed that children in orphanages who were neglected and never picked up never developed the skill to read faces. The result? They have incredibly high levels of sociopathic behavior as their ability to develop empathy was stunted. In the book Friendship, Lydia Denworth studies the underpinnings of harmonious relationships and spends a great deal of time on the neuroscience behind it, and how brain development is thrown off if little kids don't have access to human faces. She writes of one study with macaques, saying, from birth, the monkeys were not exposed to a face, human or non-human. Their caregivers wore welding masks when they interacted with the young monkeys. For the record, the animals had lots of attention, activity, and toys. They were well nourished and lovingly bottle-fed as infants. The only thing their world lacked was faces. Using fMRI, Livingstone showed in 2017 that if the monkeys had zero experience looking at faces, the parts of their brains that should have been dedicated to that task did not develop the skill. Thankfully, however, human babies are not raised by people wearing welding masks and do in fact see faces from the beginning. Of course, the book was written before COVID. The author had no idea that shortly after the book's publication, children all over the world would be thrust into history's largest Stanford prison experiment. Children who statistically have a 0.0038% chance of dying from COVID, so basically a 0% chance, are nevertheless being trained to think that it's normal to be in facilities that look more like penal colonies than schools. They're being trained to submission, patted down, walk through metal detectors, told to social distance, divided and cut off from faces. What will the long-term effects be of a generation whose brains have not properly wired around being able to ascertain people's emotions at a glance? What will this do to their ability to develop empathy, compassion, social skills? Which brings us to our next story. Kids are losing their empathy, and technology has a lot to do with it. In the article, we read, among the compelling evidence that Dr. Michelle Borba presents is the University of Michigan research that suggests that today's college students are 40% less empathetic compared to their peers 30 years ago. Meanwhile, the level of narcissism is increased by 58%. An educational psychologist and parenting expert, Borba sees these damning trends in the rise of bullying in schools and the massive popularity of the selfie, among other cultural phenomena. This was, of course, even before the COVID thing. Kids were becoming technologically autistic, and it was showing up in social anxiety disorder and growing civilizational oscillations. To make matters worse, they're even being trained now not to have empathy, such as in articles like The Banality of Empathy. In it, the author writes, "I killed a man the other day. Not literally, of course. I was watching Bandersnatch, the newest episode of the dystopian TV show Black Mirror. The episode cleverly imitates the form of a choose-your-own-adventure book. Every few minutes, the hero, I forget his name, an adorably disheveled white dude trying to make it as a video game programmer in the 80s. It's odd that the author goes out of her way to mention the character's race, but then it makes sense later on in the article when she writes, "This gave the lie to the idea that I had any genuine empathy for this white dude at all. I wasn't there to feel his pain. I was there to impose it, and simply because that would be more interesting." This bizarre incapacity to feel empathy for a character because he was European seems part and parcel of this other article entitled, "Treating Dogs Humanely is White Supremacy." In it, we read, Sky News host Corey Bernardi says treating household pets with care is now considered to be an act of racism, as minorities are said to abuse animals because of white supremacy. According to leftist professor Katia Gunter, dogs are being killed and mistreated by minorities because of capitalism, anthroparchy, white supremacy, and patriarchy, he said. So let's get this straight. Our kids are now being taught of the banality of empathy, and that being kind to animals and displaying empathy is white supremacy. You want a society of sociopaths? Because this is how you get a society of sociopaths. Our grandparents looked toward the future and assumed that in the world of tomorrow you'd have greater human cooperation and the empathy that allows for human organization. They imagined 1950s-style utopias with jetpacks, and instead, as of 2021, it seems like our oligarchs are bent on turning the West into a hellscape of African dictatorships with Hutus and Tutsis pouring gasoline over each other as rubber tires are set afire around their necks. No empathy for you. Just put your mask on, lower your head, and shut up. People fear any political leader who has his finger on the red button. What political leaders fear is people having their finger on the red button, the subscribe button. Push it and see their narratives explode. Also consider donating to help keep these videos coming. And don't forget our website and newsletter, thenewamerican.com.